sites, but any poor communities where the kids for some reason aren't going to school. And I'm going to talk about it in the context particularly of Zambia, where we did a trip there last year. It was my second trip to that particular community. It was started off by an Irish Methodist working for the Methodist Society about 20 years ago. The biggest sponsor is the World Development and Relief. World Development and Relief have about 15 projects every year, but they've supported open schools from the beginning. So what I'm going to do is going to talk to you about how it works. Open schools partners with a church or a group in a country. It never goes in on its own, so it gets invited in. It's usually local churches that it partners with. It partners with any non-profit entity, and then it sets up schools or projects. I'm actually on the board of the charity, and when I joined the board, there were 64 projects in 2019. Last year, at the end of last year, we had 389 schools across 30 countries. If we take the next slide. Thank you, Andrea. What we do is, when we're asked to go in, we really actually count the number of children that we think are not in school. Like for instance, we started to work in Zambia in 2016. I was there in 2017, but when we started it, we went in and we counted 200 children who weren't in school. So we came in and prepared for 200 kids. So the next slide is, the first thing we do then is we train volunteers from the local churches. It's mostly from local churches. Sometimes it's from Christian schools. It's the older kids from Christian schools. It's different groups. We have a course we bring them through because we're going to teach kids basic English, basic maths, those two, literacy and numeracy, and then some life skills. When we started the schools in Zambia in 2016, we started with 200 kids, but within 2 months we had 1,200 kids. Suddenly the kids came from everywhere. We were overwhelmed with the number of children. At that time, schooling in Zambia, you had to pay fees. You don't have to now, but you still have to pay for uniforms and things like that. And most of the kids, they're pristine. There's some wonderful schools in Livingstone I'm going to talk about in particular. Even to pay for the uniform isn't possible. So the next slide then is, we then teach, and schools can be in church buildings, it can be in very proper school, what looks like school, or it can be under a tree or a tin shack. And you see that from what we do. In terms of the number of kids, in 2019 we had 3,500. In 2022 we had 8,500. And at the end of last year we had 14,000. And mostly because the schooling system in Uganda fell apart after COVID. And so we have 193 schools in Zambia, all with volunteers. And then we have 4 full-time staff in the charity, so it's not a big budget. And they actually do all the teaching of the volunteers, but they also go around assessing both the teachers and the kids in order to make sure that the system is working. And we then partner with other charities in different countries. And I'll introduce you some of those at the end. So if I take the next slide. It's just a picture of some of the workbooks, because the key to what we do is we print workbooks for each of the kids. And so some of them have never owned a book before. But this is the Write Me In, the literacy program. It's designed for children who are learning from a second language, but anything from 6 years up. And the first workbook has 32 lessons. And then there's a test at the end of the lesson. And sometimes kids do the curriculum several times. If I take the next slide, this is just the one for the first curriculum is 2 books for maths. There's another curriculum after this one. If we take the next one, Again, this is a copy of the second manual, the second level for the reading, and 45 lessons in that. So we'll take the next slide. Okay, this is the group that went to Zambia. Myself and Jan, you can see behind me. There's a couple from our Fallon Church in Cork, a lady from the church in Culibaki in Northern Ireland. There's two gentlemen from Canada, one from the US, and the two people in the middle are from Zambia. The little guy who's just slightly shorter than me, Abanala, he's a pastor in Livingstone, but he's the director of open schools for Zambia. It's an unpaid position, so he's a volunteer. And the lady beside him is a lady called Jessie, and I'll introduce you to her in a moment. She's one of the volunteer teachers that's been there certainly as long as I've been involved with open schools. We'll take the next slide. Well, I should have said we were a group of 8, and 4 of us, the 4 big guys, were building a pair of toilets. And myself and the ladies, we were doing crafts with the different schools. Originally, when the various people who had expressed interest in going, I was actually going to be leading the building side of the toilets. But we ended up having an engineer from Cork who was much better qualified to build than I was, and he was in his element. So I led the ladies with the crafts. We stayed in a hotel called 40 Towers, which actually was a lovely hotel. It was absolutely crammed with staff. You couldn't turn around, but there's so many staff. But it struck me, actually, when I was there, if you could read and write, you had a good chance of getting a low-paid job in a place like this. The American guys didn't see the significance of 40 Towers. We were trying to explain to them, but it was a lovely place to stay in. This was the first school we visited, and this is the pictures from 2017, my last trip there. It's officially called Shalom School, but everybody calls it Jesse School. And it was a chicken coop which had been cleared out and made into 2 classrooms. So it was actually a good space. If you take the next slide, this is Jesse teaching a class on the blackboard. There wasn't a whole lot of space for the number of kids that you had. The colourful lady, it was a lady called Maggie, who was the lady who was responsible for open schools at that time. She worked, I think, with the Anglican Church. So the next slide. This is it today. The actual original building has been extended to include another classroom, and then there are 2 classrooms that have been built by volunteers going out. So there are 5 classrooms now. If you take the next slide, and this is the students who attend. There were 157 of them on the morning that we were there. And so when you see them all in one pile, it gives you a sense of the size of the school. Jesse is the same teacher who was there at Jesse's school. Jesse's house is the white building behind the children. And so she's been there right from the beginning. If you take the next slide, this is a slide of the older class who has slightly more space. And certainly listening to the actual class, you wouldn't be put it at all in terms of learning, like the sense of what they were learning. I blew up the slide of the little girl holding the workbook, because it's the workbooks which are the core of what open schools do, in terms of the biggest cost is printing the workbooks and distributing those. The next slide, this is Jessie doing an assessment with grade 2, and so she calls up each of the kids, and we watched the assessment, and she was assessing to see, did they actually understand what they were learning? And I was, again, it's the type of thing you would find in most education systems. If you take the next slide, on the first day, all 8 of us visited all the schools, and we just observed some classes. On the second day, the guys went off building, and I'll show you some slides of that at the end. And myself and the ladies, 3 ladies, we went and we did crafts with the different classes. So of the 157 kids that came out, the little ones we left back, and 104 we took out under the shade of a tree, and it broke into 52 in each class, pointing in the opposite directions. And 2 ladies took the younger ones and did choruses, and they had stickers. You buy 1,000 Jesus Loves You stickers on Amazon for £15. And the little hearts cut out. And so they did things like that, or rubber bands and stuff like that for the kids. We had the older group, myself and Jan, and on this one we made masks with them. If you take the next slide, and we told a story to go with the masks. And we decorated them and various. But the incredible thing was, like, we had 52 kids, all sitting in the same little space, all doing crafts, right on top of each other. And at various times, they would start singing Christian choruses. Now, I don't have a musical voice. The ladies, Angela in particular, both knew the choruses and had a lovely voice. And she was perfect for the younger kids. So it was lovely to be there. If we take the next slide. This was the next school we visited. And this was Ifunda, also with Abinala. Ifunda was there again when I was there in 2017. And this is the school as it stands now. And the guy there, Dave had been there 2 years ago and helped build the school. Now, when I was there, the next slide shows you the school as it was then. And literally, it was a number of poles with a top over the top. But when it wasn't raining, if you look at the next slide, you can see the actual roof. Because I was there one day when it was raining, and the kids just moved over slightly in the rain, came there beside them. An incredible place. I remember in this particular one, when we were setting up, when we were there the first time, 2017, we were setting up, and the kids started singing "Jesus Passing By," and there was a sense, and I wrote a poem about it, about Jesus actually stopping there, rather than passing by. It was a lovely sense, because it's very Christian community. While we're teaching them English and maths, you're teaching them in a very Christian community. If you take the next slide. This is inside the current Ifunda school. Excuse me. Large number of kids, but plenty of space. They all sit on the floor. We don't have desks or anything like that. It's a very functional building. It serves as a church on Sunday, or a church meets there. We'll take the next slide. Thank you very much, Gillian. It's funny. You never need a cup of water. If there's a cup of water sitting there, you never need it. As soon as it's not there. This is Jan basically teaching the kids how to make these masks, and just spending time with them. And as much you go to encourage the volunteer teachers. We bring all the ladies out a scarf, and they love it. But thank you. You're as much encouraging the teachers and spending time with the children. And this is Angela from Cork. Patricia from Cork, teaching the other group. If we take the next slide, this is Ifunda's house, and it's literally just across the way from the church. She's raised 18 grandchildren in this house. I actually can't remember how many children she had. I don't know whether I asked her. But as well as the grandchildren, she also takes in foster kids who go to the school. And she tells the story of how many she has them, and when they reach a certain age, the parents come back for them because they can walk. The big industry in the area is a quarry, breaking stones in the quarry. In the next slide, this is Gladys' school. When I was there last, it was Eunice's school. Eunice died during COVID, although she died of cancer. But it was just a tree, and there was a very, very large group of kids underneath the tree. This is the school where it is now, and it's literally a roof with some poles. It's a good building, and again, Dave, who was here who had participated in building the church in the last one, he was also involved in building this roof on what we call vision trips. Open schools don't build buildings. They basically teach and train volunteers to teach. But groups who support them come and help out by building buildings. I'll take the next slide. And this is Gladys School. There are two teachers, Gladys and Dorothy, who do most of the teaching, two classes. Jan is in this case we had less kids, so we had a bit more space and a bit more time, and we were doing interweaving projects with making hearts. We were interweaving paper. My wife's a teacher, so she knows all these craft things, and so she's taking the kids through the step by step. The interesting thing about the girls of the group, none of them could use scissors. They'd obviously never had to use the scissors before. The guys got it quite well, but the girls couldn't use the scissors. Before we started doing crafts, we actually watched the kids learning, and Dorothy, the second teacher, wasn't in that day, and so Gladys taught the younger ones first. And as she was teaching the younger ones, the older ones just sat and watched them, good as gold. And then when she was teaching the older ones, the younger ones just sat and drank in all of what they were being taught. If you take the next slide, and again, that's just the kids celebrating with what they had created. They might have had nothing, but they were a very happy crew. Take the next slide. This is Matilda School. When I was there last in 2017, Matilda was associated with Eunice's school, but she had just started her own. There were 3 schools came from the volunteers who were helping Eunice, and Matilda was one of them. And this is Matilda's school now, and it was the best set up in many senses. It was the only school with desks, and it's now the only school without a toilet. But it's a good building. She is helped by Dan, or Daniel, but she calls him Dan, her son, and Malaya, her daughter. If you take the next slide, this was the school in 2017, which is a fairly primitive building, but at that time it was the only building with seats, and it was a small little group. So we'll take the next slide. So again, we did the crafts. It was a bigger challenge because we had I think almost 60 doing the paper weaving, and so we took a lot longer than the younger group. And so Patricia from Arfallen, we suddenly discovered she had great skills as a dancer, and she was doing a Zumba dancing class with the younger ones. God gives you the gifts that you need. If you take the next slide. These were 2 projects that the school showed us. One was a traditional home, and one was a new home, or a modern home. And if we take the next slide, the next school was Fasaida School, and Fasaida, again, I met Fasaida in 2017. She had a baby clasped to her back. I've never seen her without some child clasped to her back. It was an interesting school, this one. The children were infectious. As soon as we arrived, they just swarmed over us, hugging us, and we were hugged so many times at this school. But we didn't do any formal lessons because the discipline, you couldn't. And also, some of the kids were very, very much younger. And they all actually had the class inside Fasaida's home. And so it was just such a bubbly place to be. So we played games with them, and they recited memory verses and sang songs for us. If I take the next slide, and the very last school we were at was Sika School, which has just started. It's associated, actually all the kids in this come from the church just across from this is in the yard of a Pentecostal church, and these kids are all from the Pentecostal church. It's not an open schools church, but open schools have just adopted it and are the process of preparing workbooks, etc. They're a much younger cohort of kids. If I take the next slide, the other part of the project then was building a toilet, something of course we take for granted. And the people who went out on the trip, they paid for their own travel, and between them, they paid for the building to be erected. So it's not costing Open Schools anything. And so we had paid for the foundation to be put in before we went out there. And we had a number of local helpers. Like the water to mix the cement had to be rolled 5 kilometres in a big barrel before you could actually start work. Now, our guys didn't do that. The local guys did it. We take the next slide. And so, just during the week, the guys worked along. We were finished by 3 o'clock each afternoon, so our day was much shorter. The guys worked till 6 each evening. If you take the next slide, and it just got higher and higher, if you like, and then they finished it totally. They plastered it and roofed it and put doors on it as well. Again, we're leaving something for the community. If you take the next slide, the interesting thing is, between visits, this was the traditional hut, and most of the homes were like that in 2017. Whereas now there are a lot of half-built houses, so built houses which are 3 or 4 blocks high, because people buy 100 blocks, build 100 blocks, and then save for the next 100. And so, going back, I'd say another 7 or 8 years, all those houses will be built. If you take the next slide, one of the things you don't have in this area is a landfill site, because there's no rubbish collection, there's no sewage, there's no electricity, but you find the whole area is covered in plastic because people just discard their rubbish, and so it's quite a you can tell the difference between the poor areas and the wealthier areas by how much rubbish is around. If you take the next slide, this is a school that we're currently building, or it's been built by volunteers, that will be Jessie's school. It's not too far from where she operates at her home at the moment. And so there are groups go out at various times when we've enough funds, we take it up to the next level. So I take the next slide. In South Africa, we have these boards, which are hard plastic boards, which is a blackboard on one side, and there's all facts printed about South Africa and the South African flag. And we use those in the poorer communities in South Africa. They were supplied by a donor. They're too expensive to make for everywhere, but for all those schools who don't have desks, they're ideal. These are the key characters. Alan McWhinney in the centre, he started Open Schools. He was a message missionary for the Irish messengers. I met him. I was the society steward for a number of years in Cork, and I used to go to conference each year. And so I met him. I was sitting beside him when he first presented at conference. I was sitting beside him at lunch, and I just caught the vision that he had, because he was talking about. He was a teacher himself. He had taught in a school in Nepal. He'd come back. He had been director of Tier Fund, and then he had this vision to start something for kids not in school. So that's Alan McElhinney. And so he worked with an American guy from an organisation called Teach Beyond, and they both started Open Schools. Mitch and Carol on this side had been involved from the beginning. Mitch was a headmaster at a secondary school in Cape Town, and Carol was his wife. She was the secretary of the school. And he's a pastor in South Africa. But he looks after mostly the work in Zambia, Zimbabwe and Malawi. And so he trains everybody in those areas. He does all the assessments. He also travels to other areas in Africa, like Ghana, Kenya, etc., to train volunteers. And then Angie Pape, she was a principal in a primary school, and she is the director of Open Schools worldwide. So she's the key character. Mitch and Angie are both paid members. Alan is still on the board, as am I. If we take the next slide. When we were there, Livingstone is right beside Victoria Falls. And so we went and we spent 2 hours at the Victoria Falls. It was the dry season, it hadn't rained in 5 months, so the falls weren't at the best. But if you go in the rainy season when the falls are spectacular, the mud levels around the area where we were, to drive there, your truck literally gets stuck everywhere because there are no paved roads, it's all mud. And the next slide, and we also did a day trip to Botswana next door. Botswana is a much richer country than Zambia, and so we spent a day on safari, which was good. One of the things I loved about Zambia, when we went to Zambia the first time, I went with a group from the UK and from the US, and as we arrived, I didn't have to pay. There was a $50 visa charge going into Zambia, but because I was Irish, I didn't have to pay. The UK guys did, and the Americans did, but it was because of all the Irish missionaries, mostly Catholic, who went out to Zambia to set up schools and hospitals over the years, which was a lovely testimony. The next slide. When I was there, I was asked to preach, and so I preached on 2 Kings 4:3. On that passage, and because I was speaking to people who had nothing, but what I finished with was one of the schools, Matilda School, was called the Shulamite School. And it was based on the story of the Shulamite widow, which is in 2 Kings 4, and I spoke about jars. Now I spoke first of all to the congregation, but I finished with this image that I had from my first trip. And the kids, they're going out and collecting kids from the local community, bringing them in to the school, and it's like bringing in the empty jars, because when you fill the kids with knowledge, you can't lose that knowledge. I wrote a poem about it called the Shulamite School. The Shulamite School is named after the Shulamite woman who looked after the prophet Elijah. She built him a room where he might rest his head, and in the course of time he saved her son and filled her jars with olive oil so she might live. Now the jars are different, being filled with knowledge that will never be emptied, because it is forever. Go around and ask your neighbours for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. And there's a sense of filling the kids, because once you educate them, they have some chance of getting a job, if you can read and write. Not in this trip, but in a previous trip, I was at one school where there was a 25-year-old guy in the middle of the kids, because he wanted to learn to count, so he could be a builder. He could build, but he couldn't count. It's fascinating. We're going to just bow our heads.